Welcome to the Power of CLV and Managing Customer Value at IBM. I am the Director of IBM Market Intelligence for IBM Global Business Services, and it's a pleasure to be joined by my distinguished colleagues V. Kumar, Raj Venkatesan, and Denise Beckman. We're going to talk about customer lifetime value. It's certainly a technique and an application that has been around for some time. And it's tough work. It certainly is tough, not just predicting what the lifetime value is, but applying it and measuring the impact in a meaningful fashion. And what we're here to talk about is how we have overcome some of the challenges that we know many in this room have faced, and certainly businesses around the world in implementing CLV. This presentation is certainly going to be about the technology industry and IBM specifically. We do believe this concept, this framework is portable, transportable, if you will, to other business-to-business applications as well as business-to-consumer spaces. So let me begin by setting the framework, if you will, for the IBM story and the power of CLV. This is really a transformational step. It's a journey. We're early on in the journey. We're going to present here today and talk about a pilot. It's a small pilot relative to the $90 billion that IBM delivers on an annual basis. We will illustrate how this initiative has delivered approximately $20 million in incremental revenue. Again, it's a pilot focused in the mid-market space. And we'll get into a little bit more specifics on what we mean by that here shortly. But in essence, imagine, if you would, expanding this analysis and the application of the analysis beyond just the pilot that we're talking about here. We are in this journey, and early on in the journey, and do plan to expand the application of CLV much beyond the pilot that we're going to talk about here today. So IBM's transformation, it really is an ongoing journey. Back in the 80s, we were very pleased to be referred to as one of the most admired corporations. In the 90s, things changed. Many people would like to forget about the 90s, but I would submit we can't forget about the 90s. The 90s were tough times, and particularly the early 90s, where we were referred to by Fortune as one of, a dinosaur, one of the three dinosaurs listed on the infamous cover of Fortune. We've certainly gone beyond that through our transformation. We are in the process of making IBM great again, and really extending beyond just the blue that people are familiar with from a hardware and software perspective and into services. And that transformational journey is one that we're on and in the process of. Driven based on market realities. It certainly has to do with our customers' outcomes. It starts and ends with the customer. What value are we delivering to our customers? When they win, we win. And in the environment of deregulation, the internet, commoditization, globalization, the world is flat, as most have probably read Thomas Friedman's book. It really is critical that we continue to innovate and transform our organization, and I think CLV is an example of a transformation, and the application of CLV is certainly innovative in the IBM story, and we'll get into some of the reasons why we would submit the application is an innovative technique. Some of the major trends that are changing the business climate facing our clients today, and certainly facing us as well, the competition is certainly becoming much more and more fierce. Pervasive globalization. We've got 300,000 plus employees on every continent in most countries around the globe, and our competition is clearly interconnected. Our employees, governments, society is much more interconnected, widespread digitization, shifting regulations. This is a very complex space that we're operating in, and yet, given the complexity of our organization and the marketplace, we're here to share with you how we've gone from building a model and a framework around that to implementation and to results. Just to touch on some of the new capabilities, if you will, that we're putting in play, given the shifting marketplace. Clearly looking at value, customer value, and through leveraging deep industry and business research, really the intersection between technology and business processes is critical as organizations move forward profitably and grow profitably, not just the top line, but the bottom line as well. We've just recently completed a study with over 750 CEOs and leaders of governments and institutions around the world. And what we found was 2 out of every 3 CEOs expect fundamental change for their organizations over the next 2 years. And it's great to see that these CEOs are looking at this as an opportunity to really, seize this change and productivity through the use of innovation. And we do believe that the application of CLV within IBM methodologically and then certainly from an application is innovative. So let me dial it down a little bit, talk about IBM's analytic priorities, given the complexity of the marketplace, the complexity of the organization. And we've evolved our priorities to focus on not just revenue, but also profit and profitable growth, if you will. Not too long ago, much of our analytic efforts were focused on finding the next revenue, finding the next purchase, and that's still critically important, but we're also infusing in really everything we do this dimension of profit and revenue. Allocating resources optimally by client. One of the benefits that CLV has delivered is our ability to bridge between marketing and sales. There is complexity certainly in IBM and in most organizations where sales, to use a sports analogy, sales got their playbook they're operating against. Marketing may have a completely different playbook, and they're not interlocked. And through leveraging a customer-centric view, CLV, we've really been able to take some steps forward to bridge marketing and sales to effectively drive revenue, to effectively serve our customers in a productive fashion and put one voice, one face in front of our customers. Granted, we're not done. There's much more to be done. And if you look at it from a marketing and sales perspective, we send out on average about 50 million touches per year. And if you look at those are proactive marketing touches, a few million more certainly sales touches, and we really want to ensure that we can optimize the touch activity. We have a high-touch club, those that receive hundreds of touches from IBM. We have a low-touch club, those that receive many fewer touches. And then we have a no-touch club. And we'll talk a little bit about that no-touch club here in the following slides. So today, we're here to illustrate the net contribution of the innovative modeling application of CLV in IBM's marketing transformation journey. And I talked a little bit about this already, the bridging of sales and marketing. That's critically important. It really is. And I would say we are being much more specific in terms of looking at elasticities, looking at cause and effect, and looking at how we overlay a marketing approach into the sales cadence process. So we're not playing off of 2 different playbooks, but operating cohesively sales and marketing. And really the development of an individual client-centric view has enabled us to uncover profitable growth opportunities. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over to V. Kumar.
Tim just mentioned to you that how, in terms of bridging the gap between sales and marketing, the client-centric view or the customer-centric view is the critical one, and CLV has helped us get there. So what I'm going to focus on is how did we get there? How did we exploit CLV concept? And it's a 5-step process. The first one is actually measuring the CLV. The second is identifying the drivers of the CLV, why some customers have high CLV and some customers have low CLV. Then you have the optimal number of touches that are required to maximize the CLV. Then you have what products to pitch. Once you master the number of touches, then you need to know what products to pitch. So once we master that also, then we reallocate the marketing resources to the right customers with the right product message at the right time. So this is a 5-step process that we implemented at IBM. And the purpose is given there, as we mentioned, why they are critical. One of the key hypotheses that IBM wanted to test in this whole thing is can an increase in touch create high value from low value customers? As Tim mentioned to you before, there are 3 types of clubs: the high touch club, the low touch club, and the no touch club. So here specifically we are talking about whether the no touch club or the low touch club, can we increase the value from each of these customer sets so that ultimately the overall profit for IBM grows, because that is one of the key things that IBM is interested in. How did we implement this? We implemented this in 2 stages. The first stage involved building models, set of models, and proving to IBM that these models have merit. And I can say that Raj and myself worked for many years on this to prove to them that yes, these models do work. But it was the toughest thing, because convincing a big organization is tough. So we took their data, built a series of models, and as in academics we say that we have to prove that the model is valid, it's reliable, and it's got predictive ability, and we'll demonstrate all those results to you. So we started off with getting information from IBM about the purchase history, the marketing information, the touch variables, and so on, and the gross margin, how much money they make out of each of those categories. Then we computed customer selection metrics. What IBM used to do is that they used to have a metric called customer spending score. They relied on customers' revenue spending in the previous years to determine who should be touched or who should be contacted and all in the next years. It's purely a revenue-based model. So if somebody never bought or somebody gave very low revenue, there was no need for IBM to touch them. But on the other hand, if you look at the CLV, it's focused on a forward-looking metric. Given that some of the drivers of the high CLV people are present in the low CLV people or low revenue people, by touching can we improve the CLV? Can we realize their potential, which is the key thing? So you exhibit potential, how do we realize this potential? So the customer selection metrics that IBM uses, customer spending score, and then RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value, and also in some cases historical profits. We call it as past customer value. So you have all these metrics along with the CLV, we compute, and then show that CLV is able to better identify the best customers moving forward. And then once we demonstrate that, then we say, okay, how do we compute the CLV? It's a function of multiple drivers. For example, recency of buying, cross-buying, how many different products they bought, as well as the marketing activities of IBM, marketing actions of IBM. So using that information, we develop an optimal allocation of resources tool using genetic algorithms. And then once we have the required number of touches for each client as a guidelines, then we say which products to pitch using propensity models. So how many times to touch, and the propensity model tells us exactly what products to pitch. And then we go to stage 2. Now we are convinced IBM of the theoretical superiority of these models. Now we leave it in IBM's able hands, and they conduct a field study to show really between the touch group and the no touch group, clearly clean groups, no touch and the touch, and then identifying the drivers of the no touch group people. Like if somebody scores very high, exhibits potential for high CLV, if they were to be touched, do we actually get it? And that's what we see we're going to demonstrate in terms of the performance. The study context is a mid-market customers, as Tim mentioned before. The number of employees in these mid-market establishments are like between 100 and 1,000, like less than 1,000. And the revenue is at least greater than $25,000 from each of their clients. The total number of enterprises are thousands, but we're saying greater than 20,000. And we have monthly transaction data for 6 years or 72 months. So we have enough data to play with. And the total observations are greater than 2 million in terms of the purchase data, number of purchase observations times the number of customers over this time period. We have over 2 million. And IBM used to use the revenue customer spending score, where they had a simple model like revenue is a function of certain predictors, and some of the predictors were past buying behavior. So given this context, what we did is took the data, measured the CLV. As you can see from here, the CLV is nothing but present value of contribution margin minus the present value of marketing cost. And it's given by the left-hand side highlighted blue, where you get the present value of contribution margin coming from probability that a customer is going to buy, and given that the customer is going to buy, how much contribution margin or gross margin this customer is going to generate. This we do for each period. And we project the CLV for a 3-year period, 36 months. It's like the standard practice that we have followed across industries, because the input comes from the management saying that beyond 3 years the business practices changes. So sort of 3 years is a window that we pick. And so probability of buying multiplied by contribution margin in each period, discounted to the present value. Similarly, on the red highlighted box, you see the present value of marketing cost, where you see how much cost they incur in touching these customers in each period, discounted to present value. But what is unique about this approach in our current study is that we bring 3 key innovations to this modeling approach. The first innovation is forecasting marketing costs over time. So far in the literature, if you see, we just assume previous marketing costs or so status quo marketing costs, but for the first time, we try to see what the future marketing cost is going to be using very involved modeling. And then we also capture simultaneously the impact of IBM's actions on purchase incidents and quantity. So by touching what happens to the purchase incident and the quantity, it's like a Bayesian approach where in each period, we model the effect of these IBM actions. And then also the fact that customer transactions with IBM alone is available most of the time. See, any database you take, you just have the customer's transaction behavior with your firm. But we all realize that sometimes the customers go and shop with competition also. So that is missing in the data. So how do you account for this critical missing piece of information about your customers' buying behavior? So we bring in these 3 key innovations into this modeling in terms of improving the marketing science into marketing practice. So just to illustrate to you, the first innovation that we talked about is the marketing cost forecasting. It's a function of past marketing costs, past buying behavior, as well as previous contribution margin. The second innovation that we bring is simultaneously integrating the marketing cost behavior, the buying behavior, as well as how much, if they buy, how much contribution margin they give, the integrated single likelihood function estimation behavior. And the third is imputing a contribution margin even when you have missing data. So with these 3 key innovations and with the set of drivers that we have across all these models, there are variations of this, and these drivers include past customer spending behavior. You have the cross-buying behavior, how many different departments, how often they buy in the past, then how recently they have bought, and then any other specific depth of purchase in specific category and proportion of purchases in different categories, as well as firms' marketing contacts. So these are the drivers, but we used variations of this, like log of these drivers or lag of these drivers, and each period effect, current effects, and cumulative effects, and so on. So many variations of this, but for practical purposes, these are the set of drivers that you see. And in terms of mathematical modeling, you have the log of marketing costs as a function of certain predictors. And for example, these predictors could be the cross-buying or the recency of buying behavior. Then you have the latent utility that we measure for the buying behavior, which is buy star is predicted as a function of certain predictors. Again, here from the family of past purchase activities. And then buy star is greater than 0 if buy is equal to 1. If we observe a purchase in a given time period, then buy star gets a value greater than 0, 0 to infinity. And if it is no purchase is observed, buy star is less than or equal to 0. So we impute these values in the classic Bayesian framework. And also the contribution margin, predicting CM star, which is CM contribution margin is equal to the star if purchase is observed, and it is unobserved if there is no purchase. But then I told you one of the key innovations, the third one, is how do we impute these values for this contribution margin when it is missing? And this is the way we treat the no purchase incidents. Suppose there is no purchase in a given month. We compute these 2 key metrics, recency, how recently this customer has bought from us, say in the last 4 months. It's been 4 months since they bought from us. Take that metric and compare it to the average interpurchase time. Suppose the average interpurchase time is 2 months. Now we clearly see that the recency has exceeded the interpurchase time, average interpurchase time? And the answer is yes. So there is a need to impute contribution margin from prior distribution obtained from the calibration data. Our paper has got the details exactly how we do this, but to highlight the contribution here. And then if the recency does not exceed the average interpurchase time, then there's no need to impute this contribution margin. So we have, with this methodological innovations, we deep dive into the model estimation. And here is the data layout. You have data from 1998 to 2004, 6 years. We use the first 3 years, 98, 99, 2000, to get the calibration. Because we're using Bayesian analysis to get prior distributions and so on, we make some informed decisions. Calibration is done. Then we take 2000 to 2003 data to estimate the model. Then we predict 2003, the 2004, all of 2004 data to see how well the model predicts. And we'll show you the prediction results. Now again, re-estimate from 2000 to 2004 and go to the field study. See how well the model behaves in the field. So the first thing is, what are the different types of models we build? We have 3 variations of the model. The Model 3 that you see there, and compared with Model 2, the difference is that in Model 3, we model both customer heterogeneity. If you had seen in the model the marketing cost and contribution margin, there is an intercept that varies from customer to customer. So we do account for unobserved heterogeneity as well as the unobserved contribution margin. So Model 3 is sort of the superior model compared to Model 2 and Model 1. And you see that Model 3 is closer to the last column here. Observed means in the holdout sample that the contribution margin is 3.1 in 100,000s, it's reported. So Model 3 is always closest to the truth, in terms of comparison across all criteria. And also, if you look at the deviance information criteria, Model 3 has the lowest deviance information criteria, 5625. That alludes to the fact that Model 3 is clearly superior compared to the other 2 models, which either do not take into account the imputation of the missing values of contribution margin or modeling customer heterogeneity. So now we are convinced that we have selected the best model. Let's play the game of comparing CLV with other selection metrics that IBM typically used to use. And if you look at these 4 metrics, customer lifetime value, customer spending score, RFM, and past customer value, get a score on each of these metrics for every customer in the sample. So I'm just using the word sample here, the mid-market customers. Get a score, and then rank order them from the best to the worst. And pick the top 15%. You do this with the first, you have 6 years of data. You do this with the first 54 months of data. And then you predict the next 18 months, or watch the next 18 months. Who is going to give you the most profits in the next 18 months? So clearly you see that, as we have shown highlighted here, the CLV metric identifies the best set of customers when you pick the top 15%. We have this done for top 15, top 30, top 50, and so on, but here we are highlighting it. Clearly it's about 35 to 40% more than the remaining metrics. So convinced that CLV is able to identify better customers looking forward, then we went on to optimization strategies. You see a 2x2 cell here where customer spending score was the metric used by IBM, and now we are switching them to CLV. So you have, like initially all the resources were given to the highest customer spending score, the right to the top right and the bottom right cells. And now because of customer lifetime value coming, and we are doing this optimization using genetic algorithms, using the response coefficients from the CLV model, you see that in the customer spending score, when it was low, the IBM was touching each customer like approximately every 5 days. Because of our optimization rule, we told them that you have to touch them every 2 days, because these are the customers, although their revenue in the past is low, they exhibit high potential for giving profits in the future, so you should increase. If you were to follow our guidelines, your value should go from 10,936 to 17,000. Like this, for each cell, we develop recommendations on the optimal touches. In this cell, a high cell, you're doing great IBM, 6 days, every 6 days you're touching, but if you can just improve the frequency a little bit to 5 days, then your potential profit can go from 53,000 to 90,000 per customer. And then in the low cell, IBM used to touch them every 9.7 days or every 10 days, and we are saying go to every 13 days. You're touching them too often, so you can decrease the number of touches. So per customer profit, again in this cell, goes up. And finally, this is a cell where IBM was spending a lot of resources. Customer high spending score is high. Every 8 days they are touching. We tell them every 9 days you can touch them. So the customer lifetime value is low. So the propensity models is basically the ones that you see helped us to pitch the right product to the right customer at the right time. So clearly, the accuracy of these models resulted in about predicting 88% of the time correct buying behavior in the hardware category, in the software category about 84%, and in the services category about 89%. So I leave the stage to Denise, who is going to talk about the field study that she personally supervised, and she's going to present the results with you. Thank you, Denise.
Well, first off, when we started down this path of CLV, we did not expect to look at a chart like this. Most people would think that you create your deciles on your CLV score and you migrate people up the ladder. What we found when we looked at the data and some of the profiling reporting is that the data was speaking to us, and that there was clearly a difference between this group of people that had been touched and those that had not been touched. And what stood out to us was that in a group of people who had never been touched by our direct marketing in any capacity, there was a group with a mean value of $350,000. It's a lot of spending. And it was a pretty powerful message. We also saw that down here at the bottom, we had people that we were touching that we were wasting. We were very inefficient in our use of marketing dollars to go after these accounts because we were losing money. So the evidence was perfectly clear what we should do. And we immediately took the actions and put a small pilot study in place. It was 1%, less than 1% of the marketplace in SMB, our small and medium business, in one country. And the impacts, the positive impacts of the change in the marketing interaction were clear in two ways. First, the average revenue. In this pilot study, when we looked at a group of customers who had not been touched in the past and we began to touch them, we saw a 10-fold magnitude in terms of their spending. So these folks wanted to be touched, they just weren't. The percentage of the establishments who actually had an incidence of touch went up by 60%. So we immediately knew that we had something going here. These pilot study groups were untouched in the first year. And in that group, when we started to touch them in the second year, there were two basic categories. People who had incremental revenue because they grew their revenue. So in the untouched, touched until 2004, there was a yes. They were touched, but we grew their revenue. And then there was the piece that we had never uncovered before, which is the piece that says, who are those customers that we hadn't paid any attention to? $19.2 million was driven against these accounts. There's two ways. It was incremental purchase, and it was purchases from net new customers. So we began the reallocation of resources. And if you think about this 2-year pilot, it took us a year to actually get here so that we would have the metrics from the actions that took place. First off, we reinvested about $94,000 from that low cell in the previously touched club into the never been touched before club. And that resulted, again, in a huge impact against a small set of customers. About 11,000 customers were in this pilot study. So imagine, if you will, that you're expanding this. This is one country, less than 1%. In IBM's world, we're a 65-country organization. And we've got a lot more customers to apply this to. From an impact perspective, there were 3 parts to the way we had to get people on board. The business dimension was the most difficult. You had entrenched budgets already in place. People were not going to give up their money to go put the money on some new group of customers. You had people dimensions. They had plans in place, and they did not want to give up on the plans that were already there. An example we talked about before was in small and medium business, the fact that we have customers being touched because they were buyers before. We had to change that and get people out of the box and start touching potentially valuable customers. Was huge. Once we did that, the campaign management change followed rather quickly. For IBM, the reality is that we've adopted CLV and its component threads through a lot of things. We've begun to use profitability in our sales decisions. What accounts do they cover? What cities do they live in? How do we allocate our sales resources? With 450 different types of sales reps in our business, you can imagine how complex that is. And we've spent a year doing that. We've migrated our propensity models from simple regression to time series so that we start going to what are you going to buy next, and is it in the next month or the next quarter? And lastly, we've got to this whole segment and profiling where we've done a huge change in the way we target our audience. In essence, to end this all off, IBM is in this transforming market. We can't depend any longer on where we got our revenues and our profits in the past. We've got to look in new places, turn over new stones. And with the innovations of being client-focused and the ability to select individual clients that we're going to cover, CLV has brought us closer to this client-centric organization that we needed to migrate to. So with that, I'll go ahead and start for the question and answers.
First, I'd like to commend you on a very clear and comprehensive presentation. Good job on that. First question, as Tim said at the very beginning of the talk, CLV has been around for a long time. A lot of people and firms have been talking about it. And so what happens is it becomes a rather casual notion, and sometimes we forget the idea that it really stands for customer lifetime value. And when we think about customer lifetime, two characteristics come to mind. First of all, lifetime lasts for a long time, especially in a business-to-business setting where a customer relationship can last for decades. It's very important to take all that into account. Second, closely related, it's inherently dynamic. As we think about a lifetime, many changes can and will occur over the course of that relationship, and therefore measures need to take all those changes into account. But your definition of the CLV score only covers 18 months. So how can we trust that your measure really does capture and reflect lifetime value?
Actually, the 18-month slide that you saw is just a theoretical formulation, like example, but when we actually computed the CLV, in the CLV slide you would have seen for 36 months, three years. The rationale for that, at least from our experience, is that beyond 3 years everything changes. And I'll let Tim answer like how it changes in IBM.
Yeah, certainly the customer set and the buying needs and the offerings that we bring to bear certainly evolve on an ongoing basis. And what we have found, and we measured from a couple of different time horizons, we found that this 3-year window has been, the most stable, if you will, and meaningful approach, given the model that we have and the client set that we do have.
It seems to me that IBM had to spend more money in total. I mean, when I saw the 4 segments that you showed, VK, at the end, it looks like on average that there was need for more resources in total. And my point is, was it kind of easy to get more resources within IBM, or did you have to fight for it? So did all the other managers believe your approach? So could you sell it within IBM?
Actually, you're very, very right. It was very difficult to get resources because you're trying to move a very huge ship, and the ship has embedded in its funding model a lockdown on quarterly spend and planning that goes a year out. What we ended up doing is reallocating. We reallocated about $94,000 from one cell into the other cells. And that allowed us to touch the 11,000 accounts in a new way. Once that's done, and now that we go back to the marketing organization and we're in this spring plan cycle today, we can affect this year's thinking. And we actually already did that in the sales organization, where we had a huge impact on them looking at net new accounts and where could they grow future customers that were not customers.
And also I just want to add on to that, that the numbers we are saying, the final net incremental value is right, but other numbers are scale numbers, so that IBM cannot reveal the actual numbers. So.
Yeah, and the key, just to quickly add, is pilot, right? To sell this internally. To your point, it's really, you know, being able to isolate the elasticities in a pilot setting, because, you know, shifting big budgets to the left or to the right is certainly a challenge. So we went in this pilot mode. But now that we've got some proof points, we build upon that.
And the numbers where we showed that the increment was there was a theoretical exercise where I said this is the potential. If you could, this is how much you could gain. And eventually, when, like Denise mentioned, we reallocated from when the implementation was done, from the people who are giving, who are loss makers, to the people who were not touched but had the potential. So it was a reallocation that was done in the implementation.
Your touch policy clearly had a big impact on customer behavior, but as customer behavior changes, that leads to two important and closely related questions. First, how do we trust a model that was built and calibrated before the optimal touch policy was implemented? If you think about it this way, if you reran the model after the policy was started, you'd probably get very different parameters and results. So how can we trust that the model is indeed the right one to be offering the policy? But let me ask the second related question, which is, along similar lines, can we view the model as more than just a one-shot intervention? Is it adaptive? Does the model account for the feedback loops that will occur in the changing customer relationship and create actually a dynamic touch policy?
One of the reasons why we included the component in the model for IBM's touch behavior, the first component was what went into touching the customers that IBM did in the past. So that kind of captures what IBM's strategy was in the past, and that could be used going into the future, we believe, into incorporating any of these other initiatives that IBM is taking. Like if IBM does the optimization strategy, then we include that information into the component, and there is a annual re-estimation procedure where we collect the data, implement the strategy, and then once the response is gotten, we incorporate that back in the next year in that component as to what strategy IBM used, and as a result what was obtained. And then by each year you could reevaluate the model, and we have a component to incorporate IBM's actions into it. And also Dennis can talk to it also, that there is a constant recording of whatever action IBM takes into the database to implement this process.
The modeling environment at IBM is constant change. I have a very large group in the production market data analytics team. And one of the things that this project uncovered is this competitive spend estimate. We've spent about 15 months on how to estimate at an establishment level, down to the street address, what their competitive spend is in 36 different categories of spend. So now we have that component in a much deeper area that we can feed back into our CLV model. So this triggered a lot of activity. It's triggered the time series of the propensity models as well.